Welcome to YouTube channel Book Review. In this video, we will talk about the book Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. The work of the great playwright William Shakespeare can be divided into several periods. The first of them is characterized by early tragedies, the texts of which are permeated with faith in justice and hope for happiness. Next comes the transitional phase. And, finally, the period of late gloomy tragedies. If we analyze the play, Romeo and Juliet, then the poet's negative moods here can be observed quite clearly. Indeed, in the play, life, as they say, is in full swing. In the foreground are good people who defeat the forces of evil. However, the inhumanity shown by the playwright is not so unarmed. She darkens life, threatens her and takes revenge. The appearance of the play, Romeo and Juliet, was a significant event in the history of not only English, but also world literature. It was the beginning of a new, so-called Shakespearean stage. The analysis of the dramatic work, Romeo and Juliet, suggests that social problems became the basis of the tragedy in it. Showing these relationships in the play reveals its historical significance. History of Creation and Time. The play, Romeo and Juliet, is one of those works of the author, which were written by him in the earliest period of his work. Shakespeare wrote his famous play between 1591 and 1595. Consider the plot of Romeo and Juliet. The analysis of the work very briefly describes the story proposed by the playwright. She tells us about the imaginary death of the main character, the news of which led to the suicide of her beloved young man. This was the reason that the girl also took her own life. A similar plot was first described long before the creation of this play. He met in the poem, Metamorphoses, created by the ancient Roman writer Ovid. The work was written in the 1st century BC. It tells about two lovers, Pyramus and Phoebe, who lived in Babylon. The parents of the young were against their meetings, and then they agreed on a nightly date. Phoebe came first and saw a lion there, hunting bulls, with blood on its muzzle. The girl decided that a formidable predator had torn to pieces the young man she loved, and ran away. Dropping her handkerchief along the way, the lion tore this handkerchief and smeared it with blood. After that, a young man came and, deciding that Phoebe was dead, he himself stabbed himself with a sword. The girl returned to the appointed place, saw the dying Pyramus, and immediately threw herself on the sword. This story was used by Shakespeare in his comedy A Midsummer Night's Dream. Only there the story of two lovers was presented to the audience by an amateur theatre. This story wandered from work to work. So, he was described in one of the Italian short stories, and then moved into an English poem created in 1562 by Arthur Brooke. It was only a little later that Shakespeare became interested in this story. He somewhat modified the English version of the ancient Roman poem. Its duration was reduced from 9 months to 5 days. At the same time, the time of the year during which the events took place changed. If initially it was winter, then in Shakespeare it turned into summer. Also, a number of scenes were added by the great playwright. But the most basic difference from all previous versions lies in the deeper content of the plot. This allowed the play to take its rightful place in the history of world literature. Plot. So what is the story of Romeo and Juliet? Analysis of the work can briefly acquaint us with this plot. The whole period, during which the tragic events unfold, covers, as already mentioned, only 5 days. The beginning of the first act was marked by a brawl of servants belonging to two different families, which are in a state of enmity with each other. The names of the hosts are the Montagues and the Capulets. Further, Representatives of these two houses join the brawl of servants. Do not stand aside, and the heads of families. Tired of the strife that lasted for more than one day, the townspeople could hardly separate the fighters. The Prince of Verona himself arrives on the scene with a call to stop the clash, threatening the violators with death. The son of Montague, Romeo, also comes to the square. He does not participate in these strife. His thoughts are entirely occupied by the beautiful girl Rosalina. The action continues in the Capuletti house. Count Paris comes to the head of this family. He is a relative of the Prince of Verona. The Count asks for the hand of Juliet, who is the only daughter of the owners. The girl is not yet 14 years old, but she is obedient to the will of her parents. Plot development. A carnival ball is held in the Capulet house, which, wearing masks, enters the young men from the house of Benvolio and Montecchi. They are Mercutio and Romeo. Even on the threshold of the house, Romeo was seized by a strange anxiety. He told a friend about her. During the ball, Juliet made eye contact with Romeo. This struck both like lightning, giving rise to love in their hearts. From the nurse, Romeo learned that the girl was the daughter of the owners. Juliet also found out that the young man was the son of the sworn enemy of their house. Romeo carefully climbed over the wall and hid in the greenery of the Capulet garden. Soon Juliet came out onto the balcony. The lovers talked to each other and swore an oath of love, deciding to unite destinies. The feeling so absorbed him that all the actions of young people were committed with extraordinary firmness. They told their story to Romeo's confessor, the monk Lorenzo, and also to Juliet's confidant and nurse. The clergyman agrees to conduct a secret wedding ceremony for the young, hoping that this union will finally force the two warring families, the Montagues and the Capulets, to reconcile. An unexpected turn of events further. The plot tells us about a skirmish that happened on the street between Juliet's cousin Tybalt and Mercutio. Between them there was an exchange of caustic barbs, which was interrupted by the appearance of Romeo. The latter, having married Juliet, believes that Tybalt is his relative, and is trying with all his might to avoid a quarrel. And this despite the fact that Juliet's cousin insults Romeo. Mercutio comes to his friend's defense. He attacks Tybalt with his fists. Romeo steps between them. However, Tybalt manages to deliver a fatal blow to Mercutio. Romeo loses his best friend who died defending his honor. This infuriates the young man. He kills Tybalt, who appeared on the square, for which he is threatened with execution. Terrible news reached Juliet. She mourns the death of her brother, but at the same time justifies her lover. The monk Lorenzo convinces Romeo that he should hide until forgiveness is granted. Before leaving, he meets with Juliet, but together they manage to spend only a few hours. The coming dawn, together with the trills of the lark, informed the lovers that they were about to part. Meanwhile, Juliet's parents, who do not know anything about their daughter's wedding, are again talking about the wedding. Hurries events and Count Paris. The wedding is scheduled for the very next day, and all the daughter's prayers to her parents to wait a little remain unanswered. Juliet is desperate. She goes to Lorenzo. The monk invites her to go to the trick and pretend to be the obedient will of her father. In the evening, she needs to take a miraculous drug that will plunge her into a state similar to death. Such a dream should last 42 hours. During this time, Juliet will already be taken to the family crypt, and Lorenzo will tell Romeo about everything. Young people will be able to run away somewhere until better times. Before the decisive step, Juliet was seized with fear. However, she drank the whole vial. Tragic ending: in the morning, the parents discovered that their daughter was dead. The whole family plunged into inconsolable mourning. Juliet was buried in the family vault. At this time, Romeo is hiding in Mantova and waiting for news from the monk. However, it was not the messenger Lorenzo who came to him, but the servant Balthazar. He brought the terrible news of the death of his beloved. The monk, Lorenzo's messenger, never met Romeo. A young man buys poison from a local pharmacy and travels to Verona. The last scene takes place in the tomb. Romeo curses the evil forces that took Juliet from him, kisses her one last time and drinks the poison. Monk Lorenzo was late literally for one moment. He was no longer able to revive the young man. At this time, Juliet awakens. She immediately asks him about Romeo. Having learned the terrible truth, she plunged the dagger into her chest. At the end of the story, the Montagues and the Capulets forgot about the enmity. They stretched out their hands to each other and together began to mourn the dead children. They decided to put golden statues on their graves. The theme of love. So, we briefly learned the plot of the poem, Romeo and Juliet. An analysis of the work tells us that its author, describing the tragedy of a person, turned first of all to the greatest human feeling. The poem is literally imbued with the poetry of love. Moreover, the high feeling gets more and more powerful sounding as the action approaches the finale. We continue our acquaintance with the play, Romeo and Juliet. Analysis of the work allows us to understand that it is nothing but the pathos of love. Indeed, from the monologues of the main characters it is clear that young people not only admire each other. In their speeches, love is recognized as a divine feeling, receiving a proud, solemn and ecstatic recognition. Moral problems. What else did Shakespeare want to tell the world? Romeo and Juliet, an analysis of the work directly points to this, raises many moral problems. They are not limited to the image of love that inspires and unites two young people. This feeling develops and further strengthens against the background of other options that show us the relationship between a woman and a man. And Shakespeare told us about them with different accents of artistic expressiveness. Romeo and Juliet, an analysis of the work makes this clear to us, have a high feeling, the grandeur and purity of which are contrasted by other forms of relations. The viewer sees the most primitive version at the beginning of the play. These are very rude expressions of the servants that women were created only to be pinned against the wall. Further, a brief analysis of the tragedy, Romeo and Juliet, tells us that there are other carriers of this moral concept. The author assigns such a role to the nurse, who expresses similar thoughts, but only in a milder form. She persuades her pupil to forget Romeo and marry Paris. Such a clash of morals leads to an open conflict between the girl and the nurse. What else does the analysis of Romeo and Juliet tell us? Shakespeare does not accept another version of the relationship of a man to a woman. It is described in the request of Paris to the old Capulet. For that time, this way of creating a family was quite common. Paris asks for the hand of Juliet, without even inquiring about her feelings. This is clearly shown to us by the analysis of Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare in the second scene of the first act, through the mouth of the old Capulet, says that before asking for the hand of a girl, she must immediately be courted. However, further Juliet's father himself guarantees the favor of his daughter to Paris, being confident in her submission to her parents. We continue to study the poem, Romeo and Juliet. An analysis of the work tells us that the Count never told the girl about his love. The behavior of Paris changes somewhat after the imaginary death of the bride, although even at the same time, a chill of the conventions that took place in those days slips in his actions and statements. The comedy of the play. What else can a brief analysis of Romeo and Juliet tell us? Shakespeare combines in his work the romantic side of love with the quirks of passion and some oddities. The author points out that a high feeling does not allow a person to continue to live in his usual rhythm, making him different from what he was before. Analysis of Romeo and Juliet, 8th grade, clearly indicates that in some scenes the main character is simply ridiculous. The author shows the reader the intolerable and passionate feeling of a girl who first knew love. At the same time, Juliet in comic scenes is faced with the slyness of the nurse. An inexperienced girl demands from the maid a story about Romeo's actions. However, she, referring to fatigue or bone pain, constantly puts off the conversation. Where else is there comedy in Romeo and Juliet? An analysis of the work allows us to draw unambiguous conclusions that it has more humor and cheerfulness than other tragedies of Shakespeare. The author constantly discharges the growing tragedy. At the same time, the love story ceases to be high romance. He seems to land and move into the plane of ordinary human relations. But at the same time he is not belittled at all. Shakespeare expresses an unprecedented breadth of his view of love in his work Romeo and Juliet. An analysis of the play confirms that almost all the characters in one way or another express their attitude to the feeling that arose between Romeo and Juliet. At the same time, the assessment of the love of the young is given by the characters depending on their own positions. But, nevertheless, the artist himself proceeds from the fact that this high feeling has an all-penetrating power and is universal. At the same time, it is purely individual, unique. The power that changes a person. An analysis of Shakespeare's tragedy, Romeo and Juliet, also proves the fact that love is a demanding feeling that makes a person become a fighter. There is no cloudless idyll in the play. The feeling that has arisen between young people is subjected to a severe test. However, neither the boy nor the girl, even for a second, thinks about whether they should prefer love or choose hatred, which traditionally determines the relationship between the Montagues and Capulet families. Romeo and Juliet seem to merge in a single impulse. However, even a brief analysis of Romeo and Juliet convincingly proves the fact that, despite the high feeling, the individuality of young people did not dissolve in it. Juliet is not inferior to Romeo in decisiveness. However, Shakespeare endowed his heroine with greater spontaneity. Juliet is still a child. She was 2 weeks away from her 14th birthday. Shakespeare inimitably recreated this youthful image. Juliet has not yet learned to hide her feelings. She sincerely loves, grieves and admires. She is not familiar with irony and sincerely does not understand why the Montagues should be hated. This girl expresses her protest. All the immaturity of Juliet's feelings and behavior disappears with the advent of love. She grows up and begins to understand relationships between people much better than her parents. Being the daughter of Capulet, she was able to rise above class prejudices. Juliet preferred to die, but she did not marry the man she did not love. Such were her intentions, and so she began to act. Analysis of the tragedy, Romeo and Juliet, clearly indicates that with the advent of love, the girl's actions become more confident. She was the first to start talking about the wedding and demanded that Romeo not put things off indefinitely, and the very next day he became her husband. The Tragedy of Love. Studying the analysis of the work, Grade 8, Based on the play, Romeo and Juliet, one can be convinced that the high feeling of young people is surrounded by enmity. The girl dies, practically not knowing the happiness of the love that she created and dreamed about. There is no such person who could replace Romeo for her. Love cannot be repeated, and without it, life will simply lose its meaning. However, after a brief analysis of the work, Romeo and Juliet, it is safe to say that the cause of the girl's suicide was not only the death of her lover. Waking up from the spell of the drug given to her by the monk, she realized that the young man laid hands on himself only because he was sure of her death. She just needed to share his fate. In this, Juliet saw her duty. This was her last wish. Yes, the characters in the play took their own lives. However, in doing so, they delivered a harsh verdict on existing inhumanity. That light of love, which was lit by Romeo and Juliet, has not lost its strength and warmth in our time. There is something close and dear to us in the constancy and energy of their characters, as well as in the courage of their actions. We warmly welcome the nobility of their souls, which found expression in their rebellious behavior and striving to assert their own freedom. And this topic, without any doubt, will not lose its relevance and will excite people forever. Who was the rebellion against? Some literary scholars believe that the play shows us the clash of fathers and children. At the same time, the conflict flares up between inert parents and progressively minded young people. However, this is not the case at all. Shakespeare did not accidentally create the image of the young Tybalt. This young man is so blinded by malice that he has no other goal than to exterminate the Montagues. At the same time, the old Capulet, unable to change anything, recognizes that it is time to end the feud. In contrast to the image of Tybalt, he longs for peace, not a bloody war. The love of Romeo and Juliet is opposed to misanthropy. Young people not only protested against old attitudes, they showed everyone an example that it is possible to live in a completely different way. People should not be divided by enmity. They must be united by love. This lofty feeling in Shakespeare's play is opposed to the petty bourgeois inertness that dominates the Capulet family. Such great love is born from faith in the greatness of man, from admiration for his beauty, from the desire to share the joys of life with him. And this feeling is deeply intimate. It connects only a boy and a girl. However, their first irresistible attraction to each other becomes the last due to the fact that the world around them is not yet ripe for love. Nevertheless, the play does not leave us hope that everything will change for the better. In Shakespeare's tragedy, there is still no feeling that freedom has been destroyed, and evil has conquered all aspects of life. The heroes do not experience a feeling of undivided loneliness, which subsequently overcomes Othello, Lear and Coriolanus. Romeo and Juliet are surrounded by true friends, the noble monk Lorenzo, the servant Balthazar, the nurse. Even such a hero as the Duke, despite the fact that he expelled Romeo, nevertheless pursued a policy directed against the existence and further incitement of civil strife. In this tragedy, power does not oppose the main character and is not a force hostile to him. In order not to miss other book reviews, subscribe to the channel and press the bell so as not to miss reviews. And please like or dislike so that the author of the channel understands your attitude to this video.